If I wanted to keep my investment real estate from killing my dream life in 2025, this is what I would do on today's episode of the 1031 Show. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Alex Stavorowski, and over the past few years, we've talked with thousands of real estate investors representing over $3 billion worth of real estate investments about the very problems that we're going to be discussing today. So the first thing that I would do to keep my investment real estate from killing my dream life would be to know my numbers. So knowing your numbers is very important from a logistical standpoint. As far as I need to know how much income I'm making, I need to know how this investment's performing for me. Has it gone up in value over time? Has it been worth the amount of time and energy I'm putting into it? All of those things can be derived from the facts and figures themselves. But beyond that, a lot of the real estate investors that I talk with make decisions based on gut feeling and instinct, and that's done really well for them. But when they don't also know the numbers to counterbalance their instincts and their intuition, then they might be making a decision without really understanding all of the variables. And that's where it's very important to know your numbers from the standpoint of the property performance itself and figuring out what might be a better option if they're underperforming properties, or how can I improve this situation overall? Because at the end of the day, your gut instinct is not going to be able to help you improve a poor performing property if you don't know that it's a poor performing property. And those numbers help you to figure out how is this working on a day-to-day basis, but also as part of the whole when we look at an investment portfolio, how is the property going to be contributing or distracting from the overall goals of your investments. When it comes to knowing your numbers, there are a lot more details that you can get into when you look at things like your return on equity, your return on time, your return on the overall experience of a piece of investment property. And we get much more into that in another episode we've recorded. But for today's purposes, we want to talk about knowing your numbers in general and knowing that your performance of a property is not just based on whether or not you have a tenant in place. Because the numbers are going to tell you, are you charging fair market rent? Are you working with the expenses and the numbers you should for the optimization of your tax strategy? How are those things factoring into the overall picture of your portfolio? And is it working towards your benefit? But the numbers themselves will tell a much different story than what maybe the experience of owning this property has told you for as long as you've owned it. So let's say you figured out your numbers. You know the income, you know the expenses, you know the tax ramifications of your property and how it's working for you. What comes next? Well, as far as knowing your options, that is going to be the next step in figuring out how is your investment real estate working towards your dream life instead of potentially killing it. So if I was trying to know my options for my investment real estate in 2025, I would initially start with what are the objectives of the different pieces of real estate that I own. And in general, when we're looking at the different categories of objectives that real estate investment can fall into, we've narrowed it down to three main groups. The three main categories that we've identified for an investment real estate objective are going to be equity growth, income generation, and enjoyment. And these categories can work independently, but there's also a lot of crossover between different types of investment real estate. For example, equity growth itself. An isolated use of that objective would be something like raw land. You're not generating any income from it. You're not using it for personal enjoyment. But at the end of the day, the goal is for that piece of land to appreciate in value over time. Ultimately, you can sell for a profit or do something else with that property and achieve a greater purpose. But for right now, that is only serving one objective of equity growth. Something like an income-producing property would be short-term rental arbitrage, where you don't own the properties themselves, you're not using them for personal enjoyment, but you are generating an income stream. An enjoyment-only property would be visiting a hotel or a condo where you don't own the property, you're not generating income from it, but you're spending money to go and get a specific enjoyment use out of that piece of real estate. When we start looking at crossovers between these sections for equity growth and income, for example, that'd be something like your long-term rentals, your triple nets, where you own the property, you're using it for income production, but you're not getting any personal enjoyment out of it. You're not going to visit this property to stay there or do anything on the personal side. It is purely a piece of investment real estate. Otherwise, you have a combination of income and enjoyment where maybe you do have a short-term rental arbitrage where you're generating income, but it's also somewhere you can go and stay. So instead of earning income from it, you use that offset of personal enjoyment for those investment purposes. On the other side of equity growth and enjoyment, maybe a vacation home where you own this piece of real estate and you're not generating income from it. You're not renting it out while you're not there, but you have this to go visit and stay at and enjoy. But also over time, ideally, this asset itself is growing in value for overall purposes of your portfolio. At the center of these three different groups of equity, growth, income, and enjoyment would be something like a fully maximized vacation rental, where you're renting it for part of the year, you own the property itself, and you're using it for personal enjoyment and capitalizing on these three different groups of investment objective. However, a pitfall we see a lot of real estate investors fall into is the fact that they try to get more out of a property than it might possibly be able to produce. They try to do too much with one property when it's really not meant to achieve that goal. For example, I was talking with a woman a number of weeks ago about a property that she was looking to buy in Colorado. She wanted to be closer to family. She lives out on the East Coast and was figuring that if she bought something here, she could rent it out maybe during the winter months, come visit, stay nearby to family, and use it for some personal enjoyment as well. However, asked her the question of what happens to that property if your son moves. What happens if he's no longer here and now you own a piece of investment real estate somewhere that you don't really have any intention or desire to go see? Well, the enjoyment factor isn't there anymore, and what sort of use of the income or equity growth objectives can she put into play to be managing a property from a distance? An alternative would be finding a strong cash flowing passive investment that allows her to generate enough income to stay wherever she wants, whenever she wants, regardless of where her son is in the country. So she could use that income to buy a place to rent for a few days at a time and go be close to family while she wants to be there, and then not have to worry about managing and dealing with the property in a location anytime after that. So gives her more flexibility, gives her more opportunity to maximize those other income and equity growth objectives as opposed to being more actively involved. I was talking with another individual not too long ago about some different opportunities and different options that he had for selling some of the investment real estate he owned and buying something else. And he'd gotten very focused on one opportunity in a resort town down in San Diego to figure out, how can I purchase this? Because my family and I, we love going there. We love visiting, spending time there. There was actually a sixplex that was going up for sale. And it would have been a very sizable investment, a good amount of the individual's net worth to put into that one asset in a high-tax area. But he saw that as an opportunity to achieve this primary goal, which was, I want to go visit the beach. My family wants to go stay at one place at one time where we can know that anytime we want to go visit, we have the money to do so, and we have somewhere to stay. We started talking through a little bit more, and again, after uncovering that the primary objective was just having somewhere that they could go visit and a town that they really like to be in, questions of, do you want to own that specific property for the property itself and the investment purpose that it has, or is it more about achieving this overall objective of a lifestyle decision? And for him, well, actually it was a pretty sizable investment. There was work that had to go into it. It would be a long-term or long-distance management sort of structure, and they'd have to be in there for a long enough period of time to make it worth the investment, where if situations changed and they wanted to start going elsewhere in the country, well, now they'd feel obligated to be going back to that same spot every year because they'd put so much money and time and effort into it. When we started talking through what are some of the other options out there to use for the proceeds of selling some investment real estate and where to put it elsewhere, the idea of more passive income to generate the ability to have the cash flow necessary so that when vacation time came up year over year, they could go stay in a nice hotel on the beach in that town that they love so much, or they could go somewhere else. They could travel the country, they could travel the world, but at the end of the day, they weren't tied to this one property. And again, he'd been so focused on this one option that nothing else really seemed to make sense until he was able to back up far enough, consider other opportunities, other options to achieve the primary goal instead of having the investment real estate itself be the goal. So when it comes to knowing your options and figuring out what might be the best strategy to help achieve my overall purpose for an investment, well, then you have to make sure that you're aware of the objective of any specific type of investment real estate. So let's say I know my numbers and I know my options. Now what? The third most important thing for an investor to know in 2025 to make sure that their investment real estate is not killing their dream life is to know their purpose. And knowing your purpose is going to be the driving factor behind what comes next. It was a reason why you got into real estate in the first place 20, 30, 40 years ago, or even 1 year ago. What was the reason behind buying your first investment property? That purpose likely has changed over time, which is okay and totally understandable and natural for that to happen because your life has changed over the last years. But the bottom line is if you're trying to use the same purpose that got you into real estate to decide what to do next and you haven't reevaluated that since then you're probably in the dark. You can know your numbers, you can know your options, but there's no more clarity on the next step than you had before any of those other factors came into play. So when you know your purpose, it's a matter of what does this property need to do for me? And we go back to the options and the different objectives that a piece of investment real estate might have. So say you've held something for a long time and been using it as a long-term rental, but now your purpose is to spend your winters in Florida instead of freezing in Montana. So you buy a property down in Florida and turn that into more of a vacation rental over time. Your objectives has changed because your purpose has changed. You don't want to be living in one state your entire life, year over year, dealing with winter. So now I want to go somewhere else. Or now I want to spend more time with my family. What's the best way to do that? Well, I can buy a property near them, but they might be moving in a couple of years. So maybe I move into a positive cash flowing investment that generates enough income for me to go visit them wherever they are in the country whenever I want. A lot of these different opportunities are accessible, but knowing which one might be the best option needs to be a factor that is driven by your purpose. Unfortunately, for many real estate investors, when they start getting into the thick of things, it becomes a matter of go with what you know. And they keep doing the same things year over year, scared about making changes because they don't know what other opportunities are out there that could improve their lifestyle, and they've actually worked their life and their purpose around the properties and investments that they have now. Where, well, I'd love to spend 2 weeks traveling, but I can spend 2 days traveling because I actually need to be back to this property and dealing with an ongoing maintenance issue. So now my life looks a lot more like deriving my purpose from my investments instead of my investments from my purpose. And that's what we help people to talk through. It's not something that I can decide for anyone, but it's something that they have to figure out if all these other things were variables that I could change. What would I ideally be doing with my time, with my life, with my money, with my energy while I have it? When we talk about your purpose, it's the dream life. That's the life that you want to achieve. And we want to make sure that your investment real estate is supporting that dream life, not killing it. And as that changes, so can your investments, so can your strategy. This is all something that we talk about with our strategic real estate analysis, is giving somebody the ability and the freedom to make these decisions about their life's purpose, is knowing that they have the knowledge of the numbers of their property, the options that they have access to, where I want to sell these properties, I don't want to get crushed on taxes, but I can't keep doing things the way they've been going. However, the fear of doing something new, in most cases of everybody that I've talked to, is going to keep them from doing anything at all as opposed to making changes. And that's where 20 years from now, they'll be doing the exact same thing that they called in to talk to me about because they didn't take the time to know the numbers, to know the options, and to know their purpose, figure that out. Until, unfortunately, it becomes a question of, well, how can I make the most of a bad situation? And that's something that we're very passionate about helping people to avoid, is feeling like they're stuck in a dead-end situation with no options and no ways to make things better. Because so far, everything they've done has worked well enough, but now it's a matter of I want to do something different and I don't know the steps to get there. Well, you start with analysis of a property-by-property basis that allows you to say, these are working, these are not. This is immediately killing my dream life. This might kill my dream life in 5 years, and this one is actually supporting my dream life. But if you don't know those numbers, if you don't know those facts, then you can't possibly make a reasonable decision for what should come next. So when it comes to helping somebody walk through that step, it's a matter of talking through what got them into real estate in the first place, why they're still working towards those goals, and what might be keeping them from achieving them. So if you feel like your investment real estate is killing your dream life, if you don't think you know your numbers, if you're really unsure of your options, and nobody has ever asked you what is the purpose of this investment, schedule some time with me to talk. Click the link in the description below to schedule some time to talk with us, and you'll also find some additional resources as well. Tune in next time on the 1031 Show.
Impact 1031 is a DBA of Ridgegate Financial, LLC. Not an offer to buy nor a solicitation to sell securities. All investment involves risk. Past performance is not indicative of future results. Speak to your finance and/or tax professional prior to invest. Securities offered through Emerson Equity, LLC. Member FINRA SIPC. Only available in states where Emerson Equity, LLC is registered. Emerson Equity, LLC is not affiliated with any other entities identified in this communication. Investment advisory services offered through AE Wealth Management. Emerson Equity, Ridgegate Financial, and AE Wealth Management are not affiliated entities.